I would never go to my partner around things that felt vulnerable. I wouldn't soothe through my partner. I would soothe through pushing my partner away. And that would make me feel safe. And now, for sure, if that ever happened with my husband, I would literally immediately go to my husband and be like, hey, I don't like that. That would always just feel like the more close somebody got to me, the more they were just going to hurt me eventually. You have feelings, and it's nice to feel feelings towards somebody and to grow in those feelings, but they also feel like weirdly threatening at the same time. I just didn't know how to trust. I didn't know how to work through things or rely on people or open up.
Her name is Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
I hope I pronounce her name properly. Thais Gibson.
I am so excited for you to be here with me today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back to another episode of our podcast. I'm here today with our amazing co-host, Mike DeZio. And today we're going to unpack some of the most common protest behaviors of the fearful avoidant attachment style. And a protest behavior really means the coping mechanisms, those behaviors that may come in and sometimes sabotage a relationship or push somebody away, even though the relationship the person has to the behavior itself is that it's an attempt to soothe. So while this person may think, the fearful avoidant might think, okay, here I am, I'm just trying to soothe myself, it might actually be something that really truly can sabotage relationships and deeply push others away. So today we're going to unpack what those common behaviors are. If you didn't already know this, myself and Mike come from both being avoidant attachment styles. I was a fearful avoidant attachment style myself. Mike was dismissive avoidant. We've both really done the work to become secure. And so we often share from sort of the inside perspective as well about our own inner worlds and some of the different experiences. So with that being said, let's kick it off. Mike, let's hear the first protest behavior you want to dive into today of a fearful avoidant.
Yeah, for sure. And when I was going through this list, there was some that I'm really looking forward to hearing sort of the real beneath the surface reason of like why it happens. So I'm excited about this one today. So for protest behavior that an FA might display is being very harsh with their words. So in what situations you're saying protest behaviors are more to soothe themselves or whatever? Why would they use like harsh words to sort of, how does that sort of make an FA feel better in a situation that they feel really triggered or their partner's done something that they're really not happy with? What is harsh words? Where does that sort of come from?
Yeah, such a great question. And so it can be to soothe themselves or really to cope, right? Which goes hand in hand. But you'll see, like, I'm sure you probably heard the term, somebody takes their anger out on others. And I think when sometimes we don't know how to emotionally process and work through what we're experiencing internally, it's like your emotions are like a hot potato, like give them to someone else, put them somewhere else. And but sort of the analogy I think of when a fearful avoidant is taking out their anger is oftentimes what's happening is there's this whole backstory of a fearful avoidant not letting somebody know that they felt hurt by something that the other person did. They hold it in. They don't want to be too vulnerable. They don't want to be too much. They don't want to be a burden. And so they'll hold in what they're feeling and experiencing. And then it's like a volcano waiting to erupt. It's like building up and building up. And then as a way of trying to deal with how much emotion they're feeling, it's like the more I express it, the more I just say it like really directly, really intensely, it feels like it creates relief for some people. And anybody who's ever, it's definitely not something that happens with dismissive avoidance. Like they usually don't feel relief from like saying what's on their mind or heart. But fearful avoidance will do that. And in an effort to get extra seen or understood, they can sometimes say more intense or direct things, number one, right? Like they might say something like, you always do this all the time. And what they're just trying to say is like, I've been holding this in for a long time. I really want this to change. So they'll use like extreme language. But then second to that is also, you may see that the more someone has anger and emotion, they feel like by using harsh or critical words, it's a way of trying to alleviate all the pain and suffering they're feeling inside. But when we actually look at it, what usually ends up happening for a fearful avoidant is they do it in the moment. They take their anger out. They attempt to give their anger away like a hot potato. And then eventually they take some space. They kind of come to the other side of they cool off a little bit. And then they feel like, oh my God, why did I say that about somebody I care about? And then they feel guilt and regret and sadness. And then often we see the fearful avoidant just go back to being boundaryless and not communicating their needs again. And a cycle can just keep going around and around.
I will say I've noticed that so many times where I've felt, maybe an FA just really letting it out. And obviously, as you were saying, has kept it in for so long and they're just like, enough is enough and just really let you have it. But like 10 times out of 10, they'll come back and feel like really, really bad and even like a little bit embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, that's okay. Like I didn't know you were feeling that strongly about it. So, next time maybe try to bring it up earlier, or maybe you were bringing it up and I wasn't hearing it, and I'm sorry as well. But I do know that every time it's happened, there's always like an apology and almost like maybe is there a bit of shame almost for like
Oh,
having
totally.
yeah. And it's like
Totally.
you don't have to feel shame. Like it's good you're speaking your mind and letting me know what's really bothering you. But like next time, maybe try to do it a little earlier.
Can we go down a rabbit hole for 1 second on this topic? So I think there's kind of two schools of thought. And one is like people always say what they mean. They
Mhm.
would never say things they don't mean. And then the other school of thought is like, no, people just like exaggerate things or say too much when they're angry. And I can tell you, I think a lot of dismissive avoidants tend to think people only say what they mean, because dismissive avoidants are really good at only saying what they mean. But having been fearful avoidant before I really worked on this, I can tell you from firsthand experience, like there were times where in an argument, I would just be so frustrated because there'd be all this built up tension, and I was fearful avoidant, and I would say stuff and it not be a reflection of how I actually felt about the person. Like I might be like, you don't even care at all. You're this, you're that. And it wouldn't be a reflection at all of how I felt about the person. It would be a reflection of how angry I was, how hurt I was, how frustrated I was. And I think that it's something that's so interesting. Like, you having been a DA, I imagine that like, because you were on kind of like the other side of some relationships that I was in a sense, right? Like you'd be like in the other person's experience, right? And so, sometimes I think when you're a DA, you're like, oh my gosh, like they said all these things. They must think that I'm really this uncaring, like, doesn't have any empathy kind of person, because maybe but you don't even have empathy, or like, just these harsh things when I was fearful avoidant. And it was like, actually, that's not how I felt. It was just this like very, strong cognitive distortion that was being fueled by my own frustration because of holding things in for so long. And when I would almost like sober out of that intense emotional state, I'd
Mhm.
often look back and be like, oh, I can't believe I said that. That's not what I meant. Like, it's not how I feel about the person. It was just how angry I felt at the time. And I don't know if that's useful for anybody listening, or I'm curious, like, if you were on the receiving end of that from people, did you ever believe like, oh, they must really think this about me?
Yeah, probably like, wow, like, geez, tell me how you really feel. Like different
Yeah.
people were coming out that you didn't know that they thought that harshly about you.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit jarring. And then like, DA being a little more sensitive to criticism, we take it as like, wow, like they're really upset, or they're really like having a go at me. And this just feels horrible. But again, like because there was that after apology and that after um bid for connection and just being like, I really didn't mean those things that I said, it would be, you should be followed up with that. So as long as I heard that, then it would be like, it's okay. Like I understand people get upset and you get caught in the moment. But I imagine if somebody didn't sort of come back and just acted like nothing happened, in the back of my mind, I'd be like, holy crap, like this person really thinks like that poorly of me, and maybe they're gonna do that again sometime. So yeah,
Yeah.
like, it would be harsh if there was no sort of follow up to say, hey, like that was an overreaction or an over exaggeration. Like I actually think you're pretty good in this area, but I just was really fed up.
I look back on like, so I mean, this was for me. I did stuff like this definitely when I was like, I had some peak moments of doing this when I was like 17, 18, 19, 20.
Mhm.
And obviously like I was young and I didn't really know what was going on inside of myself at the time, but I'd really apologize every time. But I like it just I never really like reflected on this until this moment. But now that I was just talking with you about it, I was like, oh, I think the times that I apologized for things, I didn't apologize like about what I said. I would be like, I'm so sorry, I got so angry when I said these
Right.
things, and like I'm so sorry for the way I acted. I would write letters or notes. Sometimes I would just feel like just racked with like guilt and shame about my own behavior. And I would always go back and like apologize. But I never said like I didn't mean ABC. Like that's not how I feel about the situation. This is just
Yeah,
how
yeah.
I was emoting at the time. That it's not what I actually think and feel about you as a person.
Right.
And I'm like, wow, that's so interesting. I wonder if like at those times people stored things like, oh, she must really think this about me because I
Oh,
said it, when like it really wasn't a reflection of that. So anyways, it's
yeah.
interesting to hear the other side of that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, Yeah, now you got to go back and contact all these people and ask
I
them.
did. I already did that. You know, I when I was like starting to really heal, one thing I seriously did is I really believed in like the idea of making amends. And, it was really clear because it wasn't coming from a place of like wanting to get back together with somebody I dated at 17 when I was now like doing the work at maybe 22 or 23. But
Sure.
so I would say like, hey, like here's my intention. I've like really been reflecting on my past behavior. I'm not trying to like open something up again, but I like really feel so badly about how I behaved and I'm so sorry. And like I really went to people and like did that. And I don't know, I'm such a big believer in that idea and concept.
Yeah.
And it was so like, I just always liked saying sorry. And it feels like there's this deep relief when you really like apologize and mean it and it comes from your heart. I think like it made me help me forgive myself, honestly. And so, yeah, I'm a fan of all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And lastly, is there a sense of how you're explaining you weren't sorry for like saying what you said? Because was there a sense of like pride or like, hey, I actually stood up for myself? Like, I'm happy I actually, instead of keeping it at like usual and just eating it, eating it, eating it. Yeah, it didn't come out in the most eloquent way, but I'm kind of proud of myself for like letting the person know sort of what they did.
I think I maybe didn't explain it properly. It was like I was truly sorry about what I said, but I think I just didn't communicate it very clearly to people is what I
Right.
was reflecting on. Like I never said like I don't feel this way about you. I was like, I'm so sorry for like acting like that, behaving like that. Like I apologize for my stuff.
Yeah.
But I like in retrospect, I'm like, I don't think I ever said like I don't actually think this about you. Like I don't so I just think that I wasn't clear enough in retrospect. Like when I would
Right.
apologize and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wonder now if people walked away from situations being like, she thinks I don't care at all. She thinks I have no empathy or whatever things I would say
Right.
at the time. And I'm like, I realized that like, again, like it's so long ago now, but looking back, in that apology, it would have been helpful to just get more specific so that that part was clear. Cause for me, I've always been, I grew up with like, a lot of harsh conditions sometimes. So I always saw when people would like fly off the handle or get really mad. They actually had this innate feeling of like, oh, they're just mad. They don't actually mean it. They're just speaking from like pure emotion. That's not actually how they feel about me. So I didn't like ever take it so personal. Sometimes I'd be pissed that somebody was talking to me in a certain way and I feel disrespected, but I was never like, oh, somebody called me a bitch and they truly think this is who I am. I'd be like, oh, they were mad. And it really would kind of almost roll off a little bit. So I always was under the assumption that
Mhm.
everybody just knew, like, okay, you get mad and
Yeah.
then you say stuff you don't mean, and that's just like par for the course. People say things they don't mean at all when they're mad all the time. That's normal. And
Yeah.
it's just funny because I never reflected till this moment about how people had a different attachment style than me and how
Yeah.
I was feeling like, oh yeah, like that goes without saying, I actually didn't feel like that, but like, oh, it probably would have been helpful to clarify that better at the time because I didn't realize that people were probably taking that more to heart.
Wow, that's so interesting, right? Thanks for sharing that and sort of bringing those insights to the listeners. So next protest behavior of the FA, we have having spiteful behaviors. So maybe you can go into more detail. That one I wasn't 100% sure exactly. Like, what would you categorize as like spiteful behavior?
Punishing, like trying to get someone back or make them feel how you feel. And I think that this is something that's so interesting. I think that fearful avoidance deeply want emotional connection and spitefulness. I do not condone. I think none of these things are healthy at all. After, doing this work and being in this space, I would say like there should be none of these things in a relationship. And if they happen once every 5 years in a long-standing relationship, they should be acknowledged, moved through, addressed. Like we want to hold our relationships to a good standard. But, um, what I found when I was honestly reflecting on my own times of being a fearful avoidant and having spiteful behaviors is I noticed that every time I was spiteful, it was this like last ditch attempt to emotionally connect. And I know that sounds so crazy, but it was like I would feel a certain way in a relationship and I didn't know how to communicate my needs when I was fearful avoidant or speak up or say like, hey, this behavior makes me feel upset or hurt or violated or insecure or whatever I was feeling. And so I would hold it in and then I would try to like indirectly say things or show my mood was not good when those things would happen. And then if I still didn't feel understood or heard, I would then try to treat that person the way they had just treated me. So like let's say somebody was cold and uncaring when I would like let's say came home from work. And then, if it hurt me and I was trying to kind of address it indirectly, like, and it wasn't landing, then I would
Mhm.
do something that was spiteful, like be extra cold one evening. And
Yeah.
it was like this subconscious strategy for me in reflection. And again, I'm not saying that it's okay, but it was this subconscious strategy of like, okay, you're making me feel a certain way. You're not understanding how you're making me feel. So now I'm going to make you feel how I feel. So finally, you see and hear me, and we're feeling the same things. And in some weird way, we're emotionally connected as a result. It was almost like an
Wow.
attempt to get seen and heard. And we've all heard that expression, like give you a taste of your own medicine, which I think is like a really unhealthy thing. But every time I've ever seen, like since working with people and being in this field for a long time, every time without exception, I've seen somebody be like, spiteful behaviors give you a taste of your own medicine. It's almost always rooted in, um, well, I'm going to make you feel how I feel so you can finally see and hear and understand what I'm actually feeling from your behaviors. And so,
Yeah.
not good, but you can see how the subconscious mind is like grasping at straws to try to get understood.
That's so interesting.
I just wanted to pop in here and let you know we are doing a 7-day free trial to the All Access Membership Pass at PDS, which means you get access to literally everything inside of the school. And this includes the 4 live webinars I do with our students every single week. And on top of that, you get access to all of our different courses. We have over 55 different courses on relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional mastery, guilt and shame, learning your needs, so many different facets that are really important to master our lives and feel really good about our lives going forward. And last but not least, there's a daily community event. We have trained facilitators and coaches who are in there doing that work, showing up to support you on your journey every single day. Please join me on the other side. Come check it out. See if it's a fit for you. I'd love to see you there. Go ahead and sign up by clicking the link in the description box below.
The part that I really, really want to know is when you were trying to let your partner know that you're not happy about something, well, would that look like? Like you started to give the silent treatment, or you started to like go in the kitchen and bang pots and pans? Like, what was sort of these sort of little behaviors that you were trying to let your partner know, like, hey, like I'm obviously not, something's wrong. Like, can you freaking address it? Like, what's going on here? Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, what were some of the things that people might look out for? What were some of the things that you did to sort of
So,
let the person know?
yeah, it's such a good question. So, I think these are like really unhealthy behaviors. So if you catch yourself doing them, do the work. But honestly, they were things like be in a mood. Like, let's say that something happened. I remember, for example, I was dating somebody and it was like I was living with this person. We were together for a few years, like 4 years at the time or so. And it was like a serious relationship for how young I was. And I remember we went out with a group of people and there was like this waitress and she really took to my partner. And my partner was being fine. Like he wasn't like doing anything too weird. But I remember at one point she like, oh, was like rubbing his shoulder. And I remember like being so pissed in that moment, like so mad. But I truly was like unwilling as a fearful avoidant to ever be vulnerable. Like I just wouldn't be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So that I remember I was just super dismissive the whole evening, like just shut down, talking to everybody else, ignoring him completely, like all these things. So it would be like I was in a mood and clearly I was like shut down. But it's like, oh my gosh, like that doesn't do anything healthy or positive for a relationship. Like something I had to learn as on this path to being secure was like how to have those hard conversations, like how to say, hey, I feel vulnerable in this situation. This doesn't feel good. Like, I want you to be mindful about ABC or whatever it is. But I really had no emotional awareness or capacity for that at the time. I just didn't even know it was like to communicate. I didn't see healthy communication growing up. And so I would go in a mood or I would shut down or, oftentimes I know we've talked about this on this podcast. I would get mad about something small and unrelated 3 hours later that like, oh,
Mhm.
you get home and maybe like, I don't know, the lights were left on. Oh my God, the lights are, like these silly things. But it was trying to displace my anger onto something that I felt safe to talk about instead of something
Yeah,
that felt vulnerable to me.
that makes sense. Just for an example, like in that situation specifically, what would a secure person do like in that moment? Because it seems like you were in a group. It wasn't just you and your partner. So when the waitress went away, you couldn't say, "Hey, like, listen, that I'm feeling uncomfortable right now." You said you were in a group. Well, what do you think would be sort of the best course of action there that you would have taken now, being secure?
That's such a good question. It's interesting. So what I would for sure do now, like if it were with my husband now, it's so interesting. This is so cool. So this is that was a good question. So he at the time I just realized that I would never go to my partner around things that felt vulnerable. I wouldn't soothe through my partner. I would soothe through pushing my partner away. And that would make me feel safe. And now for sure, if that ever happened with my husband, I would literally immediately go to my husband and be like, hey, I don't like that. Like that makes me feel super uncomfortable. And I would go for like closeness and connection and that reassurance. I don't even know like for sure if I felt like he acted a certain way back, which isn't what happened with the partner at the time. And my husband would not be like that at all. He's so like good about stuff like that. But let's just say in theory, if he acted a certain way back, I would go and say like, hey, I didn't like how that interaction went. That made me feel really uncomfortable. I need you to have like respect my boundaries. I need to make sure if when she returns, you're like mindful, like, please don't do that. That felt really bad. Like, how would you feel if the shoe was on the other foot? Like that wouldn't feel good. Can you see where I'm coming from? Like I would communicate. But because like I'm just playing out situation versus situation at the time, my partner just kind of like sat there and just kind of brushed it off. And if that happened here, like in life now, I would just go like close for soothing, for like connection. Like I would just go sort of like cozy up and be like, I didn't like that. And maybe have a laugh or, I guess I would kind of just expect that. And I could say it if I needed to, but I would just think that my husband might sit closer to me or pull up his chair next time or whatever it is, just like something like that. But it just made me so aware of how it wasn't possible for me to approach for soothing at the time. It wasn't in my wheelhouse of like possibility. Whereas now it's something that like feels so natural to do. And it's sad that it's hard to be fearful when it's sad for my old self that I would feel like that and just not know A, how to soothe myself and B, how to even like go to someone for closeness or reassurance. Cause it was just out of my complete awareness.
That's a tough situation. And I was asking you about it because I was thinking on how I'd react as well. But I'd also feel like a little nervous to like bring it up in front of if there's like people around, like a group. So maybe I'd be like, hey, can I talk to you for a sec? Like, can we go meet up the bathroom or something? I'm just thinking about it. I'm like, oh, it'd be hard to have a really like direct and vulnerable conversation right there at the table. But the way you sort of spelled it out, like you weren't saying anything super like, how dare you or what do you like you weren't embarrassing. The example you gave wasn't trying to embarrass the person or like make them feel bad. So that would be fine if you just mentioned in front of the group, like, hey, like, I noticed you guys are getting a little friendly there. Can you, it's not making me feel the best. Can you just watch out for that?
Yeah.
That should be out there, right?
Yeah, and I think too, I just want for anybody listening to know that if that's like, if somebody's like friendly back because they feel uncomfortable and they're laughing it off and it's a one-off and like your partner's not normally like that, then in that particular case, like, okay, like life. But I also don't condone either from the other end that if somebody has a partner who's constantly too friendly and flirting with everybody or things like that, that might be like a separate conversation at nauseum, like in more length, saying like, hey, this is a boundary for me forever. Like, please don't be like touchy feely with people that, stuff like that. So that could be a separate conversation if it was that kind of issue. But if it was like the person laughed it off, brushed it off, or it was friendly back a little too much out of like, not knowing how to deal with the situation, then, that can be something to address in that way. I have one question for you. So when you were DA, how would you have dealt with that situation? That's what you were saying is when you were DA specifically, you would have taken your partner and addressed it and asked them to go talk about
Yeah,
it?
I would have aided it in the moment and probably just like felt really uncomfortable and not happy about the situation, but not wanting to show like I'm upset or not wanting to like, I'd be afraid that if I brought it up in front of everyone, it would sound like not good. Like it would sound like I'm ruining the party or, I'm making stuff up and it's not true. So I would probably wait until we got home and then said like, hey, like, maybe I probably wouldn't have said it in a good way. I would have been like, why did you do that? Like, how could you not think that was, appropriate or, you're disrespecting me or,
Interesting.
yeah, I think
At least you would address it. I honestly would have never addressed it at that period of time.
so.
Like I would have literally just been like shut down and like have it come out in another way. Cause it would have, I would always feel like this when I was FA. When something really hurt, like affected me, I would always feel like, this person's hurting me. How can I go to the person who's hurting me with something I need? Like I would always feel like, oh, if the person is involved in a situation that hurt me.
Yeah.
Now, like, I can't trust them. They're hurting me anyways. I'm not even gonna go to them because, like, I guess I just felt like the person was the enemy. Don't go to the enemy with your problems, and I would really take that to heart.
Yeah.
And I think it just speaks to the same thing we talk about so often, which is this theme of how if somebody is your dismissive avoidants are like more pervasive, like more pervasively shut down and dismissive avoidant, but fearful avoidance when they get hurt, I think they shut down way harder and more deeply than a dismissive avoidant. It's just like stone cold for a bit, like just so shut down and really want to push the other person away that's hurting them. Whereas
Sure.
dismissive avoidants kind of pull away into themselves. And so anyway, it's just interesting to see that kind of play out.
Yeah. Great example there. Okay, next cortex behavior of the FA, flip-flopping from hot to cold.
Yeah.
So in a triggered sort of state, would that be like a kind of fast in real time flip-flopping where it's like you're really hot, really cold in like shorter periods of time? Or would this be over a period of like days where like some days you're nice and then other days you're being really cold and kind of keeping to yourself and keeping away from the person?
Yeah, for fearful avoidants, it's all of the above. Like,
Yeah.
for sure there's those really sharp moments where there's like a trigger and it's all shut down. But I also think that because fearful avoidants do have this like fear of being trapped or helpless or committing to the wrong person and choosing wrong. And also because fearful avoidants have a lot of core wounds. So like when I look back on my own past experiences, I can remember another relationship when I was like 18, like just starting off university. I was like, I went to school at 17 and so I was young. So I was like 17 turning 18 and I went and I remember being in a relationship early and met someone. And I remember like, it was almost like the more like things were going smoothly, one day
Yeah.
I'd be like, this is great. Like things are going so well. And I'd be really positive and optimistic and really warm and all these things. And then another day I would be like, like this is getting too close. Like it's too fast. It's too close. And I would have this, like I would always just feel like the more close somebody got to me, the more they were just going to hurt me eventually. So I'd always experience feelings as like bittersweet. Where it'd be
Yeah.
like, okay, there's like, you have feelings and it's nice to feel feelings towards somebody and to grow in those feelings, but they also feel like weirdly threatening at the same time. Like, okay, you're just gonna hurt me. This is gonna be really painful. And because I just didn't know how to trust, I didn't know how to work through things or rely on people or open up, then it would just feel like engulfing. So little tiny things could make me doubt everything so fast. So like even like if I was I'm trying to think of like a specific example. I have this memory of being in my car and I was like probably 18 or 17 and I was dating this person and I have this memory of thinking things were going well and then just realizing on some level that I was like spiraling because of like getting off the phone and I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like small, like, hey, I might have to come at like 2 o'clock on Saturday instead of 11. And it would be like in my head, I would be like, why did it change? It changed because there's something going on here. And I would just spiral and then I would go so quickly into like catastrophizing. I'd be like, oh, this isn't going to work. Why am I dating somebody right now? Like I shouldn't even be dating. Like, and I would just go down this like rabbit hole of all these things. And it would be over like the tiniest stuff. And so it's because it's tiny objectively, but subjectively I have all these core wounds that I'm projecting onto the experience. And so it would just be so easy for me to be like all in and so about something and then see just a small thing that didn't go as planned or the way I liked or what, felt comfortable or what I expected. And rather than like clarifying or communicating or just asking for my need or any of that, none of those tools were at my disposal. So I would just spiral and then push the person away again. And that would be the very common theme for me.
And they really have no clue what's going on, right? They're just like, oh, like
Or people I dated, yeah.
I'm not happy today. Okay, I don't know. Hopefully it's not something I did.
Yeah, totally. And I have like memories and I don't know, I'm trying to share this so that people who are going through this like also maybe have somebody to relate to. But like I have memories of like, first of all, one person being like, why are you like so like like moody with me? Like you like what's going on? And like trying to ask for clarity. And then another person being like, why don't you communicate? Like clearly something's going on. Like you're upset with me. Just say it. Like just talk. And I remember like there was just this deep, deep block in those moments that I didn't even know how to like address or approach. And yeah, and so those were the inner conditions of my conditioning.
And as another sort of example, would this be like, let's say you're on like a scale, Libra scale, and you feel yourself getting more attached and more close to the person and feelings are involved. Is pulling back and pulling away your way of sort of gaining control back? Not control, but like, in relationships, some people say, oh, one person's sometimes more into the other person than the other. And is there a point where you feel like, oh, shoot, like, I feel like I'm more invested than this person is, and this is potential for me to get really hurt. So I need to like pull back to like balance out the scales again. Does that resonate at all or not really?
Honestly, I don't think it was ever really, I did things that were for control. Like I would try to control my own life or sometimes control like plans or circumstances or things like that. But I don't think any time that I like pulled away was really like with the intention to get the upper hand. I think there's times definitely when I was young and I would like start dating and maybe I would do things to like not text back too fast. Like, oh, you didn't hear from them for an hour, wait to text them for an hour. Like these like childish things we do when we're young and we're figuring stuff out. But I don't think that times where I was like flip-flopping, it would be about control. It would more be about like me spiraling and going into a mode of self-protection and trying to feel like emotionally safe and just like assuming that something bad was going to happen and then feeling like, oh my gosh, like this person's really going to hurt me. I have to like keep them at arm's length so I don't get hurt too much. Like it was definitely more from just fear. Control is always rooted in fear, but I never, it was never like, I can't think of any times where I was like, oh, to get the upper hand or something like that. It was more, sure, I did that with like, don't answer too fast or, those like silly things earlier, but not in like when I was in connection with somebody and like in those moments of fear.
It's just like,
The start of a new year always feels like a fresh start, a chance to set goals, get organized, and focus on what really matters. And for a lot of you, financial wellness is at the very top of that list. But let's be honest, keeping track of every single subscription, bill, and expense can feel really overwhelming at times, especially when life is fast-paced. And that's where Rocket Money can be such a game changer. Everything is finally in one place, and you can save money without the stress. Rocket Money is a personal finance app designed to support you every step of the way. It helps you find and cancel any unwanted subscriptions, keep an eye on spending, and even works to lower your bills so that you can feel more confident about your financial future. With Rocket Money, everything is easy and clear to understand. You'll see all of your subscriptions in one place so you know exactly where your money is going. And if there's something you no longer need, Rocket Money makes canceling it very quick and hassle-free. Their dashboard also gives you a crystal clear view of your expenses across every single account that you have. You can set a personalized budget, track your spending habits, and get alerts if something needs your attention, like an unexpected charge, or even if you're nearing your budget limit. And the best part is that Rocket Money will even step in and negotiate lower bills on your behalf. No endless hold music, no frustrating phone calls. It's actually all handled for you. With over 5 million users and over 500 million saved and canceled subscriptions, Rocket Money isn't just an app. It's a partner on your financial journey. Members save an average of $740 a year using Rocket Money's premium features. So if you want to take a step towards financial clarity and peace of mind today with Rocket Money, you can head to rocketmoney.com/Thais. rocketmoney.com/THAIS.
I remember hearing it so long ago, and there's no science or research on this whatsoever, that in every relationship, there's like one person who's more of the, I think the term was like reacher. There's like a reacher and I forget the other term, but it's like in every relationship, there's always one person who's always wanting the other person more. And that's just in every relationship. This is how it goes. But this is like in high school, I remember hearing this and I'm like, there's no theory behind it. So I was just wondering if there's like a balance where you feel, oh shoot, this person is way more into me than I am them, and I need to balance it out. But that's not based on attachment theory or anything.
So what you're saying, I think, is different in different parts. So I'll tell you some patterns I've seen over the years. And so like some, for sure, you can have somebody who's like anxious and avoidant. And obviously the anxious person is going to constantly activate, dismissive avoidant is going to constantly deactivate. So you're always going to have that person in that case, right? Like there's one thing. Then there's going to be times where for sure one person's more into the other person than the other, and you're starting to date people, it won't be exactly even. But what I've seen in like long-standing secure relationships, okay, is that there's times and places where one person's putting more effort into the relationship than the other. But rather than it being like a 70-30 or these more polarized extremes, it's like chapters and seasons of life. So let's say you have two secure people. Let's say they're both putting in like a pretty equal effort. Maybe it's like 55-45 sometimes, but that might flip to the other person at a different time. And a lot of that will be based on external variables. So like, let's say there's one person pursuing the other person a little more, and then they start settling in, and one person lets their guard down a little faster because they felt more comfortable, and now they're feeling a little more invested. And then you might see fast forward 10 years, one person stops working because they don't have to work. And so that person's having more time and space to worry about the relationship and partner. The other person takes on two jobs. Like, so I think there's things like that. I do think that if there's acute imbalances, it's actually not a great sign. If it's like, okay, we're constantly 70-30, like that's just not a balanced, harmonious relationship. One person's going to feel badly. But if there's ebbs and flows, that's life. That is relationship. Like there's going to be one time one person's a little more all in than the other, and then the other person gets busy, and then the other person's a little more in than the other. But it should be 60-40 at worst for little seasons or chapters, but usually sitting much closer to the middle ground.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I Google it just because
As you're dying to read something to me, I can tell.
Googling as we were talking. There's a reacher and settler. There's this theory they call it. There's always a reacher and a settler in a relationship. Reachers are partners who are generally considered less desirable in their relationships and were with people outside of their league, while the settlers were the partners who are more desirable and have settled for someone below their league. Anyway, you can Google it. There's a lot on Reddit about it, but sorry, you gotta follow up on that.
Yeah, I just think that's like, I think that's more pertinent to like dating. Like if you're really in a secure relationship, like what love requires to last is not like not okay, like who's in what league, who's like more interested in the other person. It's like this equal mutual effort where people like put in the effort, there's reciprocity, they talk things out, they invest. If one person, like let's just say in theory, there's the reacher and settler in dating, maybe in early stages, but then like when there's this actual dynamic of longevity in a relationship, the reacher is gonna I'm not sure how much I buy into the theory, but the reacher person in a secure relationship, they're gonna go to the other person and say, hey, I'm needing a little more effort in this area, or I'm needing my needs to be met. If somebody's insecurely attached, they won't share their needs. So then we're subject to all the games and all of those things. But in a secure relationship, there's going to be like mutuality, reciprocity, respect, communication. Hey, I don't feel like I'm getting, I don't feel like you're present enough, or I don't feel like you're investing enough in this area of the relationship. And those conversations are going to be had, and those pivots are going to be made for that relationship to really last long term.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so we're not gonna reach your settler to the attachment.
I'm always like hesitant, like the dating theories, I feel like it can go into like the games space where it's like, okay, now we're playing games and relationships and we're weighing on these like superficial things. And it's more like, hey, a good relationship, people hash things out and they really come into that middle ground and harmony. And if there's a lack of that, that can be in the early dating stage, but then we want to be moving towards that. And if it doesn't move towards that, probably that relationship isn't necessarily going to last long term.
Exactly. Makes sense. Okay, our next protest behavior, the FA, is testing by pushing away. So why FA is test by pushing away as a protest behavior.
So here's like what I think is the big underlying piece for this. So here's something I felt all the time in my own experiences. And I guess I'm just going to speak all firsthand today in the podcast, but hopefully it helps people just feel like, okay, like if she moves through it, then it's possible. But I remember because I wouldn't communicate my needs. So I figured this out after a lot of self-reflection. So at the time, my experience would feel like, okay, somebody doesn't care, because I would feel like I'm trying and I would feel like the other person's not trying as much. But what I realized looking back on some self-reflection is actually people are trying in all sorts of ways all the time. And it wasn't coming in the way that I actually needed. So a lot of things I really needed as a fearful avoidant were probably things like reassurance, a lot of transparency around things, a lot of consistency, a lot of like somebody trying to make me feel emotionally safe because I would spiral a lot. And a lot of those things I had no idea how to put into words or how to communicate that. And so, what I would see a lot of the time is people really trying through like acts of service or trying to make a big effort, things that like literally were on my periphery. They weren't even like a big love language. I would just totally miss them. And so, or doing a lot of things that I would question or not really believe in anyways, or so I was constantly, honestly, doing two things. I was minimizing people's efforts without realizing, or just missing them, because of different love languages or needs. And then I was also never communicating my own needs. So then I would arrive at these conclusions where like, oh, this person's not trying, they don't care. And so then I would be like, okay, well, I better get out of here before I get hurt. And so then I would start to like push away. It would almost always would be like this theme. I would feel like I'm not cared about or my needs aren't getting met. I had no idea that my needs weren't getting met. Like I would just feel like this person doesn't care. And then I would like push away and I would say like, oh, I don't think we should really spend this weekend together. I want to just do my own thing. Like things like this. Where it'd be like, we have weekend plans and it would be like Thursday. I'd be like, actually, I'm just going to do my own thing this weekend. And person would be like, what do you mean? Like we have plans. And I would be doing it to see like, oh, are they going to fight to make plans? Do they care? And so I would test a lot to see like if people cared, if people were going to like be there. I would do things like that, even testing if like their stories added up, all these things. And the roots of it were a few core things. I had no idea how to communicate my needs. I would pour in, all that I could to a relationship, but not realize that, hey, I'm pouring in on one side, but I'm deactivating all the time and like accidentally like doing these things, which literally I did not recognize in my own behaviors. And then, I wasn't giving room for having like the ability to hash things out or tell people like what was going on for me. So to get certainty, to get clarity, to get answers to things, I would test. And that would be my only way that I could feel some degree of like emotional safety and let my guard down. And so, it's so interesting. I remember having these times, and this is, I talk about this in PDS sometimes, but remember having this like big realization within myself that like I would always justify my own behaviors and never even reflect on them. I would always think everything I did in a relationship was totally fine. And the reason is because I would think, well, the other person's doing it first. They're hurting me first. So however I respond, I'm allowed to do whatever I want. So for example, if somebody didn't show up or make an effort, I'm now like allowed to be so harsh with my words. I wouldn't even reflect on my own behaviors because I would just be so immersed in like how that person was making me feel. And so I didn't have room to be like, oh yeah, so then I spoke that way. Or then I would cancel plans at the last minute on the weekend and how that would feel to if someone did that to me. I wouldn't do well with that at the time. So like, I never I had this big like reckoning when I started doing a lot of inner work of being like, oh my gosh, like geez, like people were really good to me for for how chaotic I was all the time and how often I spiraled and did all these things. And it's just funny because at the time I really was just like, I thought the other person was kind of the bad guy. And like the other person was, and it's not to say that people were like perfect in all the relationships I was in, but I always thought it was like 90 their issue and 10 mine. And then I realized like, whoa, it was majority me going through these things and having these unhealthy patterns and behaviors. And then I just didn't notice because I was in my own hurt so much.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Now that I think about it, I think I also thought that the other person was the main problem all the time in like, most past relationships. And I don't know, is that like a DA?
Probably miserable.
If you like, I almost like everybody once they do the inner work and see, they're like, oh shoot, like I can see how I caused a lot of problems here. I could see how I was triggering my partner like crazy without even realizing it. Like I could sit here all day and talk about the behaviors that I did that were like not good and not conducive for a healthy relationship. But it's just interesting how you don't see it. Is that just our ego or is that just blind spots or like why is it more comfortable to blame it on the other person? Do we think we're perfect?
I think it's so much of it. I think the biggest thing is just that when you're in your own suffering, you go into this survival mode. Like when you're in pain, you're like just trying to think about how to alleviate the pain and why is the pain happening. And so I think it takes us out of the ability to be like consciously aware. Like we're not in a position where we're like, oh, I have a core wound triggered and it's my core wound from my own childhood and now it's coming up. It's like, why is this person doing this to me and making me feel this way? And it's I think that that's why self-work is so important, because we're going to have our own stuff, and we're going to have our own things. And of course, for anybody listening, there can absolutely be like people who are, maybe somebody has an anxious attachment style and maybe they show up imperfectly, but maybe they're really with somebody who's like an abusive partner, like a covert narcissist or whatever it might be. So like there's definitely times where like you can reflect on your own behavior and the other person can be like the much harsher person. But I think that there's this way, what we have to come into doing is navigating like what are our own patterns that we want to work out or work through, but also being able to honor that, hey, I have to work on my own stuff, but I also have to have boundaries, and I have to be able to communicate my own needs, and I have to vet that somebody's going to show up. And it's not like one or the other, only do your own work. It's do your own work, because that's where you have the most control. That's where you're going to have the biggest breakthroughs, but also make sure that somebody's meeting your needs and you can communicate with them and that they show up too.
Sure. And like, yeah, I noticed, the patterns. When you just look at your patterns, you're like, okay, I'm the constant in the situation that seems to happen over and over and over. And I wonder, like, does a pattern constitute happening twice, happening 3 times? Like, at what point do you say, okay, this is for sure me and not the other person?
This might be like too extreme for some people, like a little too growth mindset, but like here's what I want to recommend for everybody, and you can kind of take this in stride if you're listening. I'm somebody who, and this has really, really benefited me over the years, every time I have any kind of conflict, I do like very consistently, I'm like, what was my part? Because even if my part was like this big, I don't want to go back ever to that trap that I was in once upon a time, which was like, oh, I can do and say whatever I want because the person hurt me first. It's not like who hurts first and then the other person, all bets are off. Like, if you have a part, like, who do you want to be? Somebody who justifies your behavior all the time because of your reaction? Oh, it's fine to react however I want as long as it's in a reaction. No. So I'm always looking for my part. Like, I'll always be like, okay, maybe I did this or said that. And I'll always try to reflect. And I think it puts you into, maybe it's like a little too hyper growth mindset for some people, but for me, really served me well over the years. Helped me break patterns and be really, really self-aware. So I believe in doing that. I'm a big fan of that. And I'm a big fan of like radical ownership. Like I really think that, I don't know. I just feel like I try really hard. I don't have to like feel regret or badly about things, because I know that if I make a mistake, I'm a human. And I'll go own it. I'll go be like, hey, I did mess that up. I didn't see that. Like, and I think that that's just like healing and absolving, like, and I'll still work on what to do. So I really try to own my part. Like, I think that whenever there's a conflict, we at least have some sort of part the vast majority of the time, even if it was this big and the other person's is this big, or sometimes we are this big and the other person's is this big, but just looking is good. And so I think that it's always worth looking. And then I also think that, again, you want to be like looking out for yourself too, because some people, especially like anxious attachment styles, fearful avoidants, can be really guilty of this too, is sometimes you can go the other way. And it's like you take everything as just your fault and you're not like advocating for your needs and boundaries. So knowing that even though they're different, both are required. Like, even though radical ownership doesn't mean I only look for my fault. I'll look for my fault, but then I'll try to clarify, well, what needs do I have from the other person? What boundaries do I have going forward? How can I communicate and convey what I felt from the other side? Because both are necessary to properly resolve a conflict.
Totally. What was I not saying? Where did I not set a boundary? And it led to this, going on, ongoing. For sure. That's so important. I think we have time for one more. You want to do one more?
And then we'll do a part 2 of this episode, because there's so many good ones.
Okay, there are good ones. Which one do I want to pick here? Become critical. That's probably a big one. So as a protest behavior, why do fearful avoidants feel safer, or why do they sort of express that behavior? Why do they become critical?
Yeah. The criticism is a big deactivating strategy for fearful avoidance. Like, it's not something dismissive avoidance very often use, but I'll say 2 things, and I feel terribly about this, but I remember being like 18, 17. I was still in that like early kind of relationship. And I remember him making an effort, like really putting a lot of effort in the early stages. And he was very like normal and stable. And I didn't grow up around normal, stable relationships very much, so I didn't really know what to expect. And I remember kind of like being critical of him to my friends, like saying like, oh, like he's always wanting to spend so much time together, and kind of like putting him down indirectly saying that. And literally it's because I was scared that someone was treating me well. Like looking back, it's like, when I did a lot of like relationship reflection, I realized like I would actually become critical to create space, to be like, oh, look, he has these things that I don't like, or I would look for like nitpicking things to sometimes be
Yeah.
critical about,
Yeah.
because it was my way of being able to say, look, this person's not perfect. So if it doesn't work out, I'll be okay.
Yeah.
And it was, again, just this way of like keeping at arm's length so I don't get too crushed or hurt. And I think that that's something that a lot of fearful avoidants do.
Interesting. Would that be something you sort of keep to yourself or share with friends? Or would you like be critical of your partner outwardly as well? Would you share it outwardly? Keep them almost a little insecure that, oh, maybe I'm not good enough for this person.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely don't think, I think I was always a little too empathetic and felt some guilty about things. I definitely wouldn't be like, trying to be critical to put them in their place or anything like that. Like I definitely wouldn't put people down. I definitely wasn't great at giving compliments. I really learned that. Like I would give them to friends or, but it was hard for me to like be affirming of someone else because I would feel like that was too vulnerable. Like, oh, they're gonna like think that I like care too much and then I'm gonna get more hurt. Like, these kinds of things. So I had that part, but I wouldn't like put people down to be like, oh, so they don't think that they're too great. But I would definitely be critical more to like friends, or like to friends or to myself, like think of their flaws to kind of like create space. But I would say that more like critical would go back to that initial example. Like if I was really mad and holding things in, it would be really nice for the most part. And then I would just boop, like be a volcano waiting to erupt. So I would, I would suddenly become critical and I would put that back as like harsh with my words because I was holding things in and then it just came out in a really ugly way.
Okay, that makes sense for sure. I think that's the list for the day. There's a few more, but again, we can do a part 2.
So stay tuned for part 2. For anybody listening, there's definitely more protest behaviors. Mike came up with so many like really, really great ones. And I love that you asked so many great questions during these episodes too. And like we really dig into some of these things in a lot of detail. And will you guys let us know in the comments? Like Mike and we share a lot personally. And I want to be mindful the podcast is supposed to be like educational and about everybody listening. And I hope that sharing is something that like helps make it like relatable and normal or helps you kind of see your inner patterns. But if you want us to stay more on like talking about the topics and the subject and, these things, we can do that too. Let us know in the comments. And then the one thing I'll just say to wrap is if you are watching on YouTube, you can also listen to this on any of the podcast platforms that you stream from. We are on there, iTunes, Spotify, everywhere. And then if you are listening, you can watch the full video version on YouTube as well. And just thank you so much. You're such a fantastic co-host, Mike, and always appreciate you doing this with me. And thank you so much to all of our listeners for all of your support and for always tuning in. We really appreciate you.
See you next time.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with friends and family who are on their journey of personal development and growth. And thank you for listening. Next week, we'll be back with more insights to guide you on your journey. And until then, keep practicing our tools and strategies to change your subconscious mind and apply some of the powerful learnings from this podcast so that you experience real life transformation.